Good afternoon. Hello. Yay. Okay, we're going to start with the afternoon sessions. Okay, so now that we have had lunch, how are you? How's the day going? No. Again, you know the answer. So I'm going to count for 3. 1, 2, 3. How is the day going? A green level. Much better. Thank you. Okay, so we're going to go for the next sessions. The first one, how can regulators influence inclusivity in clinical research, with Laura Pioppo from ACT EU Program Manager, European Medicines Agency.
Thank you. Okay. Thank you very much, Akrin, for the kind invite and for giving the opportunity to present the perspective of the regulators on this important topic. So I will start with a slide to remind all ourselves of the principles and the objectives of the clinical trials regulation, although this is in place already since January of 2022. But mandatory by law for new application only from January 2023. So, of course, the regulation is different from the directive, the clinical trials directive, that needed to be transposed nationally. But let's also consider that this clinical trials directive has been in place for 18 years in the European Union, defining the requirements for the conduct of clinical trials. So, from 2004 to 2022, we had the clinical trial directive, and then there was a big shift on the requirements of the regulation that is directly applicable as it is in its entirety to all the member states. So the objectives of the regulation, of course, always the patients at the center, so to protect the rights, safety, dignity, and well-being of the trial participants, and making sure that the data generated are reliable and robust, to foster innovation and support more multinational clinical trials. This is clearly a requirement of the regulation to have clinical trials that are conducted in more than one member state with a joint collaboration of the member states. Increased transparency, and I have a dedicated slide to this because we have a public portal of CITES, the Clinical Trial Information System, where all the data on clinical trials run in the EU are accessible to the general public, including documents such as the protocol and the summary of results. And then the whole regulation is implemented with the use of CTIS, that is the one and only platform needed for the conduct of clinical trials in the EU. So overall, to make the European Union an attractive place for research and development. So when it comes to CITES, I only have one slide, that is this one, to remind ourselves that the whole clinical trial life cycle goes through this platform. The sponsors have access to their workspace with the use of credentials, and they submit their clinical trial applications that is then assessed by the regulators, by the member states. And after the authorization, all the information on clinical trials, including start of trial, start of recruitment, temporary halt if any, serious breaches, unexpected events, corrective measures, inspection reports, it all goes through CITES. So it's the platform that we need to use for the whole life cycle. And then there is the public website that is with open access, no credentials requested. And as I said before, is the central repository available to the general public to access data on clinical trials. We have revised the transparency rules for CITES. We have a new public portal, let's say still relatively new, since June last year. At the moment, if you access this public website, you can see information for more than 9,000 clinical trials. You can see information on inclusion, exclusion criteria, endpoints, population, medical condition, protocol, template of the informed consent, and the patient information sheet, and the results when they are available, just to name a few of the documents that are displayed. On average, we publish 500 trials every month. And why is publication important? For many reasons. First of all, it's a legal requirement, is defined in the CTR, but is also necessary to build trust to the general public and share information in everything that we do and facilitate access to the data. Of course, the documents that are published, in this document, personal data needs to be protected as well as commercially confidential information. So now I'll move to ActEU and explain how all the activities that we have in place can contribute to the topic that we are discussing today on inclusivity and representativeness of different trial participants. So this first slide on ActEU is just to mention that it is a joint initiative. It's not done only by the EMA. We are doing this together with the European Commission and the heads of the medicine agencies. We launched it in January 2022, so at the time of the implementation of the CTR and building on the momentum of the implementation of the CTR and to facilitate the way all these parties work together, so Commission, Member States, and EMA, we have launched this joint initiative. We have a work plan. This is the slide with our priorities for 2025 and 2026. And you can see that we have a governance with the ActEU steering group and the multi-stakeholder platform. You can see it at the center because it's really important for us and central, the communication that we have in place with our stakeholders. And I have a dedicated slide on this. So what are the priority actions right now for ActEU? Where are we putting our energy and efforts? The implementation of the CTR, the operation of the CTR is still paramount. We still see after 3 years from the implementation of this legal text that there are some processes and activities that needs to improve to have a seamless process of submission, evaluation, and authorization of clinical trials, as well as the support for non-commercial sponsors and academia and aspects related to safety. Then we have another macro area that is on maximizing the impact of clinical trials, so design and conduct of excellent clinical trials. So here we focus on the revision of ICH E6R3, all the methodological aspects, and also an initiative on consolidated advice on clinical trials. And the last point is on underpinning activities. So, of course, communication is very important because we need to inform our stakeholders on what we do, training as well, and data analytics. So just to give you a flavor of the priority actions that at the moment we have. Multi-stakeholder platform, why this is important and how does it work? So after that, we have created ActEU that was initially only including regulators, so again, EMA, Commission, and Member States. We, of course, concluded that we needed to have an open dialogue with the stakeholders, all kinds of stakeholders, to hear from them and understand from them what are the priorities when it comes to clinical trials. So the platform includes these 3 sections. Engagement tools, so we have surveys, consultations, ways that are useful for our stakeholders to provide feedback. We have workshops. Some of them also broadcast that everyone can follow. If you access the EMA website on the dates when we announce the events, you can follow the live discussion and then have access to the presentation and the highlights of the workshops. And then we have the multi-stakeholder platform advisory group. And I have more details in this. On this topic. This is a group that has been created 1 year ago. We had the first meeting in April 2024. We meet on a regular basis. We meet every 3 months, and we discuss with our stakeholders the priorities in relation to clinical trials, so that we jointly, regulators, industry, academia, patients and consumer, healthcare professionals, funders, we discuss what really needs to be prioritized when it comes to clinical trials. We have a regulatory chair and a stakeholder co-chair, and this appointment is rotated every 3 years. We also have ethics committees and ad hoc participation of some of the experts, depending on the topics that we treat. But the advisory group for us is really a very important platform that we have in place to have an open dialogue and discuss aspects like the one that we are discussing today for inclusion in the priorities of the active work plan. So let me say a few words really on the current activities and where the efforts are in place and what we may consider for the future. CTR implementation, as I said, I have more details in the next slide. We hear from sponsors that there are some practical aspects that needs to be solved. We publish on a regular basis KPI reports where we see the trend of how many clinical trials are submitted to cities, breakdown per therapeutic areas, per trial phase. The member states that are more heavily involved and the ones that are appointed as RMS, you can consult these KPI reports. We just published in April the statistics for January, February, and March. We are also revising the training material for cities because we know that the amount of information that was published was almost overwhelming for the sponsors. We had, especially for academia, of course, and non-commercial sponsors, so many links, so many presentations, user guide, e-learnings. So we are revamping and streamlining the access to the content on training material for CTIS and CTR. And as I said before, of course, we have academia represented in the multi-stakeholder platform advisory group. So what is not working right now and what we need to improve when it comes to the implementation of the CTR? And again, this is jointly done with all our colleagues at the member states level. You can see the responsible bodies on the right-hand side. Better preparation of the RFIs, request for information. We know that the content of these RFIs sometimes is not clear. Strengthening the role of the RMS, of the reporting member states. Harmonization on the requirements for Part 2, use of common templates, translations, risk-based approaches, and low interventional clinical trials, patients' involvement. And then we know that for medicinal products that are used in conjunction with a medical device, there are different requirements on the CTR, medical device regulation, and in vitro diagnostic, and CTs, of course. So this is just to give you a flavor of the main points that we are considering right now. Support to non-commercial sponsor has a dedicated team looking at this. We want to support non-commercial sponsor and academia to conduct more clinical trials, even better if they are multinational, although we are aware that most of the times there are some limitations in terms of funding. And all this with the intention to have trials done by non-commercial sponsor generating high-quality scientific evidence and for the benefits of the EU citizen. So what have we done to support non-commercial sponsors? We have created an interactive map. You have the link also on these slides where we have put together all the initiatives that were already in place at national level, so what the member states were doing nationally to support non-commercial sponsors. With a compilation, is like a signposting page. Then we have a regulatory help desk because every time a non-commercial sponsor or academic sponsor is stuck with the use of cities and they have an issue, they can raise the ticket, and we're trying to speed up the resolution of the tickets that are raised by these non-commercial sponsors. And again, the involvement in the advisory group. Pilot on scientific advice and regulatory advice. There are two initiatives, and these are initiatives to have an early dialogue with the regulators. So also here again, concept of diversity, equity, and inclusion could already be discussed with the regulators at the time of the submission, before the submission of the application in CTIS, to have an early dialogue. We have the pre-CTA that is more of regulatory nature. We have received 14 applications so far. And the one looking more at the scientific aspect, we have received eight applications so far. And just to conclude on ACT-EU before I conclude with the main points for discussion today, I want to raise for awareness, your attention, hopefully you know about it already, that we have launched in March a trial map that is really designed keeping the interest of patients organization and healthcare professional in mind. It's a more user-friendly platform to access data on clinical trials, and this is listening to our stakeholders and the feedback that they gave us in January 2024 to have a simple patient-oriented dashboard available from cities that patients and caregivers can use. So with this trial map, because the search is also done by geographic location, and the users can look directly at the hospital and the sites in their region, hopefully we can have also a more inclusive approach in facilitating the recruitment of the patients at the site. So now let's move on the topic for today, inclusivity and representativeness, general principles. Why a broad representation of trial participants is important. Of course, we have discussed already this extensively in the morning, and you will see some recurrent themes that are also in my presentation, because this can drive innovation, might improve the trial success rate through an increased enrollment of patients at the site, increase access to treatment, increase the trust in the research process, and also help us to reduce health disparities and making sure that we include also in the trials a patients population which otherwise might not have these opportunities. So there is a clear benefit to have increased inclusion and balanced representation of population in the clinical trials that are then ultimately aligned with the major population groups that the intervention intends to treat. So we have to acknowledge the challenges, and we have heard about this already before. So where do we stand when it comes to inclusivity and representativeness? We have to acknowledge that there is not a global definition of diversity and inclusiveness, and various stakeholders might seem to tackle this under different angles. In certain regions, we might talk about population age when it comes to inclusiveness. We have heard before geriatrics clinical trials, pediatric clinical trials, but in other regions might be more linked to ethnicity and race aspects. We know that we have a lack of data. This was also a point raised this morning. So we do not have, at the moment, a clear understanding of the extent of this issue across the member states, because the data that we have right now are quite generic on gender, but we don't have specific analysis done in this respect. We know that we have restrictive protocols also for design and the eligibility criteria that might lead to systemic exclusion of certain population, pregnant women, so patients with HIV, and this should be, of course, avoided. And overall recruitment of underrepresented and underserved population in clinical trials should be supported. We also know that we might have regional disparities in clinical trials across the EU. So inclusiveness in clinical trials across the European Union should be guaranteed. And particularly for oncology trials, we are aware that we might not have exactly the same extent of trials in the region. So also to work in that respect. At the present, there is no guidance, specific European guidance to promote diversity of trial populations, but we have many ICH guidance documents touching on this. So opportunities, what can we do and how things can improve? So first of all, as mentioned before, the CTR really aims to have more multinational clinical trials, and this already by default can allow us to have more variety for the inclusion. ICH E8 in the revision 1 on the general principles for clinical studies also fosters diversity and inclusiveness, and it calls for engaging with stakeholders and creating a culture of dialogue like the one really that we are having today, which is great. And also we should guarantee that access to clinical trials in certain specific population is happening, their involvement when it comes to pregnant women, breastfeeding, pediatrics, geriatrics, even participants that have existing medical conditions and are taking concomitant medication, just to name, of course, a few. So also looking ahead, opportunities. We also heard this morning about